My name is Edward Lopez, and I'm 72 years old, sitting here alone in my small Miami apartment, touching the scar and disfigured left side of my face that cancer and surgery have turned into something so horrifying that my own grandchildren run away screaming when they see me, and my children now refuse to invite me to family gatherings because they say my appearance frightens everyone and ruins the atmosphere. 18 months ago, I was diagnosed with aggressive facial cancer that required radical surgery to save my life. But while the doctors managed to cure the disease, the treatment left me looking like a monster that my own family can no longer bear to be around. I'd love to know where you're listening from today, so please share your location in the comments below. And if this story touches your heart, I hope you'll consider subscribing, because what happened to me shows how cruel the world can be to those whose appearance doesn't match society's expectations, and how even family love can have shallow limits. Let me start by telling you who I was before cancer changed everything, so you can understand what I lost and why my transformation has been so devastating for both me and my family. For 70 years, I lived a normal life with a normal face that never drew stares or comments from strangers. I wasn't particularly handsome, but I wasn't ugly either. I was just an ordinary-looking man who could walk through the world without anyone giving my appearance a second thought. I worked for 45 years as a supervisor at the Port of Miami, managing cargo operations and coordinating with shipping companies from around the world. It was steady, honest work that provided a good living for my family and allowed me to retire comfortably with a pension and savings that would support me through my golden years. My wife Carmen and I were married for 43 years before she passed away from diabetes complications 5 years ago. We raised 4 children together in a modest house in Little Havana, where we built a close-knit family that gathered every Sunday for dinner and celebrated every holiday and milestone together as a united group. Roberto is my eldest at 48, a successful attorney who lives in Coral Gables with his wife and 3 teenage children. Maria is 45 and works as a high school principal, married to a doctor with twin daughters who are 8 years old. Carlos is 42, owns a small construction company, and has 2 young sons with his wife. My youngest, Sophia, is 39 and teaches elementary school, with a 6-year-old daughter who was always my special little princess. After Carmen died, my children made sure I wasn't lonely or isolated. They maintained our tradition of Sunday dinners, rotating hosting duties between their houses, so I could spend time with all my grandchildren regularly. The kids loved visiting Abuelo Edward, sitting on my lap while I told them stories about their grandmother and the old days in Cuba before we came to America. I was a grandfather who taught them to fish, help with homework, attended every school play and soccer game, and spoiled them with treats and toys whenever their parents weren't looking. My relationship with my grandchildren was one of the greatest joys of my life, and I looked forward to watching them grow up and maybe even meeting my great-grandchildren someday. My health had always been relatively good for a man my age. I had some arthritis in my hands from decades of physical work, mild high blood pressure that was controlled with medication, and the usual aches and pains that come with getting older. But overall, I felt strong and active, able to maintain my independence and enjoy retirement activities like fishing, gardening, and volunteer work at my church. The first sign that something was wrong appeared in late 2021 as a small, dark spot on my left cheek, just below my eye. It looked like a mole or age spot, something so minor that I didn't even mention to my doctor during my regular checkup. Carmen had always handled our medical appointments and health concerns, and without her reminders and attention to detail, I wasn't as vigilant about monitoring changes in my body. Over the next several months, the spot gradually grew larger and darker, developing an irregular shape and rough texture that should have been warning signs of something serious. But I convinced myself it was just a normal part of aging, like the liver spots that had appeared on my hands and the wrinkles that were becoming more pronounced around my eyes. It wasn't until Roberto noticed a spot during a family dinner and insisted that I have it examined by a dermatologist that I finally sought medical attention. Roberto had been concerned about my health since Carmen's death and had been encouraging me to be more proactive about medical care and preventive screenings. The dermatologist took one look at the lesion and immediately scheduled a biopsy, explaining that the appearance and characteristics of the spot were consistent with skin cancer. She warned me that depending on the type and stage of cancer, treatment could range from simple excision to more complex surgical procedures. The biopsy results confirmed our worst fears. I had squamous cell carcinoma, an aggressive form of skin cancer that had already begun to spread into the deeper layers of tissue beneath my skin. The dermatologist referred me to an oncologist and a plastic surgeon who would work together to develop a treatment plan that could save my life. The oncologist explained that my cancer was in an advanced stage that required immediate and radical intervention. Because the tumor was located on my face, near my eye and close to vital structures, the surgery would be complex and would likely result in significant changes to my appearance. But without treatment, the cancer would continue to spread and could eventually become fatal. The plastic surgeon was honest about what the surgery would involve and what I could expect afterward. He would need to remove not only the visible tumor, but also a significant amount of surrounding tissue to ensure that all cancer cells were eliminated. This would create a large defect in my face that would require multiple reconstructive procedures to repair. He showed me photographs of other patients who had undergone similar surgeries, and I was shocked by the dramatic changes to their appearance. The procedures left people with visible scars, asymmetrical features, and sometimes missing parts of their faces that couldn't be fully reconstructed. But he emphasized that the alternative was death, and that modern reconstructive techniques could restore some functionality and appearance over time. My children were supportive and encouraging when I told them about the diagnosis and treatment plan. Roberto, with his legal background, helped me understand the medical consent forms and insurance coverage. Maria researched the doctors and hospitals to make sure I was getting the best possible care. Carlos offered to drive me to appointments and help with recovery. Sophia promised to coordinate family support and meal preparation during my treatment. They all assured me that my appearance didn't matter to them, that they loved me for who I was inside, and that we would face this challenge together as a family. Their support gave me courage to proceed with the surgery, even though I was terrified about what I might look like afterward. The first surgery took place in March 2023 and lasted over 8 hours. The surgeon removed a section of my cheek that was larger than a silver dollar, along with tissue that extended from below my eye almost to my jawline. The cancer had spread further than the scans had shown, requiring even more extensive removal than originally planned. When I woke up from surgery, the left side of my face was covered with bandages, and my eye was swollen shut. The doctors explained that the operation had been successful in removing all visible cancer, but that I would need additional procedures to reconstruct the damaged area and restore some semblance of normal appearance. The first time I saw my face after the bandages were removed, I didn't recognize the person looking back at me from a mirror. The left side of my face had a deep, irregular crater where healthy tissue used to be. My eye socket was distorted, my cheek was gone, and the scarring was unlike anything I had ever seen on a human face. The doctors assured me that this was just the beginning of the reconstruction process, and that future surgeries would improve my appearance significantly. But even they admitted that I would never look the way I had before the cancer, and that some degree of disfigurement would be permanent. My children visited me in the hospital and tried to hide their shock at my changed appearance. I could see the horror in their eyes, even though they smiled and told me that everything would be fine. Roberto's teenage kids couldn't look at me directly and made excuses to leave the room quickly. Maria's twins started crying when they saw me and had to be taken out to the hallway. I understood their reactions because I was having the same response to my own reflection. The face that looked back at me from mirrors was frightening and unnatural, like something from a horror movie rather than a real person. I found myself avoiding reflective surfaces and covering the damaged side of my face with my hand when I had to go out in public. The second surgery, 3 months later, attempted to rebuild my cheek using tissue grafted from my thigh. While this procedure filled in some of the crater and provided better structural support, it left me with a patchwork appearance where different types of skin and tissue created an obviously artificial reconstruction. The third surgery tried to improve the symmetry around my eye and reduce some of the most dramatic scarring. But each procedure seemed to create new problems while only partially solving the existing ones. My face became a map of surgical interventions, with scars upon scars creating a landscape that bore little resemblance to the man I had been. As the months passed and my appearance became more permanently altered, I began to notice changes in how my family interacted with me. The visits became less frequent, and when my children did come see me, They seemed uncomfortable and distracted. They would sit farther away from me than they used to, and I caught them looking away when I spoke directly to them. The grandchildren's reactions were the most painful. My 8-year-old twin granddaughters, who used to fight over who could sit closest to me during family dinners, now stayed on the other side of the room and whispered to their mother when they thought I couldn't hear them. They asked if Abuelo was sick and whether they could catch what he had. My 6-year-old granddaughter Sophia, who had been my special little princess, was the most frightened by my appearance. She would hide behind her mother when I entered a room and refuse to come near me, even when I tried to offer her favorite candy or toys. Her fear was genuine and heartbreaking, and I could see that my presence was causing her real distress. The teenage grandchildren were old enough to understand what had happened to me, but they were also at an age where appearance and social acceptance mattered enormously. They seemed embarrassed by my disfigurement and worried about what their friends might think if they saw their grandfather looking like a monster. Roberto was the first to suggest that maybe I should skip some family gatherings until my reconstruction was further along. He explained that the younger children were having trouble adjusting to my changed appearance, and that it might be better for everyone if I gave them time to get used to the idea gradually. Maria supported her brother's suggestion, adding that her twins had been having nightmares after seeing me, and that their pediatrician had recommended limiting their exposure to situations that triggered anxiety. She assured me that this was temporary, and that once the children understood that I was still the same grandfather inside, everything would return to normal. Carlos and Sophia agreed with their siblings, though they seemed more uncomfortable about excluding me from family events. They promised that we could have individual visits where the children could gradually become accustomed to my appearance without the pressure of large group gatherings. But the individual visits became less frequent and more strained as time went on. My children seemed to struggle with how to act around me, and conversations that used to flow naturally became stilted and artificial. They would ask about my medical appointments and recovery, but avoided the normal family discussions about work, relationships, and daily life that had characterized our previous interactions. I began to realize that my changed appearance was affecting not just the children, but the adults as well. While my children loved me and wanted to support me, they were also struggling with their own discomfort and grief over the loss of the father they remembered. Looking at me forced them to confront mortality, illness, and fragility of physical appearance in ways that were difficult for them to process. The exclusion from family gatherings became more systematic and long-term as holidays and special occasions passed without invitations. Roberto explained that they had decided to keep celebrations small and low-key while everyone adjusted to the changes in our family dynamics. But I could see pictures on social media of large gatherings that included extended family and friends, events that I was no longer welcome to attend. When I asked directly about being included in these gatherings, Maria told me honestly that my appearance made everyone uncomfortable and that the children's reactions were disruptive to the celebratory atmosphere. She said that until I looked more normal, it would be better for everyone if I stayed home. The isolation was devastating and complete. Not only was I dealing with the physical pain and ongoing medical treatments, but I was also cut off from the family relationships that had given my life meaning and purpose. I went from being a beloved grandfather who was central to family activities to being someone who was too frightening to be around. I tried to maintain connections through phone calls and video chats, but even these interactions became less frequent and more superficial over time. My children seemed to prefer text messages and brief check-ins rather than longer conversations that might require them to see my face or engage with the reality of my condition. The social isolation extended beyond my family to include neighbors, acquaintances, and casual friendships that had been part of my daily life. People at a grocery store, bank, and church would stare openly at my disfigurement, some with curiosity, others with obvious disgust or discomfort. Children in public would point at me and ask their parents loud questions about what was wrong with my face. Adults would quickly look away when I caught them staring, but their initial reactions of shock or revulsion were impossible to miss. I began to understand how people with visible disabilities or disfigurements navigated a world that wasn't prepared to accept differences in appearance. I started avoiding public places as much as possible, shopping during off-peak hours, and choosing self-checkout lanes to minimize interactions with other people. I stopped attending church services because I could feel the congregation's discomfort and distraction when I was present. Even routine medical appointments became ordeals because of the reactions from other patients in waiting rooms. The depression that followed was deeper and more persistent than anything I had experienced, even after Carmen's death. Not only was I grieving the loss of my former appearance and the easy social interactions I had allowed, but I was also dealing with the rejection and abandonment by the family members who were supposed to love me unconditionally. I began to question whether my decision to undergo cancer treatment had been the right choice. While the surgery had saved my life, it had also destroyed my quality of life and my most important relationships. Sometimes I wondered if dying from cancer might have been preferable to living as an isolated monster that even my own grandchildren feared. The medical team that had treated my cancer was sympathetic to my emotional struggles, but had limited resources to help with the social and psychological consequences of my disfigurement. They referred me to support groups for cancer survivors, but most of the other participants had cancers that didn't affect their appearance, and they couldn't relate to the specific challenges I was facing. I also tried individual therapy to help process my grief and adjustment issues, but talking about my problems didn't change the fundamental reality that my appearance was permanently altered and that this change had destroyed my family relationships and social connections. The physical recovery from surgery was progressing as well as could be expected, but the emotional recovery seemed impossible. How do you rebuild a life when the foundation of family and social connection has been completely destroyed? How do you find meaning and purpose when you're too frightening to be around the people you love most? But something unexpected happened 15 months after my initial diagnosis that would begin to change my perspective and open new possibilities for connection and purpose. I received a phone call from Dr. Patricia Hernandez, a social worker at the Cancer Center who specialized in helping patients adjust to life after disfiguring treatments. Dr. Hernandez explained that she had been following my case and was concerned about my social isolation and depression. She told me about a support group specifically for people who had facial disfigurements from cancer, accidents, or birth defects. This group met monthly and provided both emotional support and practical advice for navigating life with a changed appearance. Initially, I was reluctant to join another support group, having been disappointed by previous attempts to find understanding and connection. But Dr. Hernandez assured me that this group was different because all the members shared the specific experience of living with facial differences that affected how others perceived and interacted with them. The first meeting I attended was held in a conference room at a community center, with about 12 people of various ages who had different types of facial differences. Some had been born with cleft palates or other congenital conditions. Others had been in accidents, and several were cancer survivors like me. What struck me immediately was how normal and comfortable everyone seemed with each other, despite having appearances that would shock or frighten people in the outside world. They talked openly about their experiences with staring, rejection, and social isolation, but they also shared strategies for building confidence and finding acceptance. I met Maria Santos, a woman in her 50s who had lost part of her face to cancer 10 years earlier. She told me about the initial devastation and family struggles she had experienced, but also about how she had eventually rebuilt her life and relationships on a foundation of self-acceptance and advocacy for others with facial differences. I also connected with Robert Kim, a man my age who had been severely burned in an industrial accident 20 years ago. He shared stories about how his family had initially struggled with his changed appearance, but had eventually learned to see past the physical differences to the person they had always loved. These conversations gave me hope that my current isolation might not be permanent, and that there might be ways to rebuild connections with my family and create new sources of meaning in my life. The group members shared practical advice about handling public reactions, finding supportive communities, and maintaining self-esteem despite social rejection. Dr. Hernandez also connected me with a family therapist who specialized in helping families adjust to medical crises and permanent disabilities. This therapist offered to work with my children and grandchildren to help them process their own grief and discomfort while learning strategies for maintaining relationships despite my changed appearance. Roberto was the first of my children to agree to participate in family therapy sessions. He admitted that he had been struggling with his own reactions to my appearance and felt guilty about the family's exclusion of me from gatherings. The therapist helped him understand that his discomfort was natural and understandable, but that it could be addressed through gradual exposure and emotional processing. Maria and Carlos eventually joined the therapy sessions as well, and slowly, we began to work through the complex emotions that my cancer and disfigurement had created for all of us. The children learned that their discomfort was normal, but that it didn't have to be permanent. And I learned to be patient with their adjustment process while advocating for my own needs and inclusion. The process of rebuilding family relationships has been slow and sometimes difficult, but we've made significant progress over the past 6 months. My children now visit more regularly, and while the interactions still require effort and intentionality, they feel more genuine and connected than they had since my surgery. The grandchildren have been the biggest challenge, but with professional guidance and gradual exposure, even they are beginning to adjust to my changed appearance. The younger ones are learning that Abuelo Edward is still the same person inside, even though he looks different outside. The teenagers are developing empathy and understanding about disability and difference that will serve them well throughout their lives. I've also become involved with advocacy organizations that work to promote acceptance and inclusion for people with facial differences. I speak at medical conferences about the psychological and social impacts of disfiguring treatments, and I volunteer with newly diagnosed patients who are facing similar surgeries and life changes. This work has given me a sense of purpose and meaning that helps counterbalance the ongoing challenges of living with a facial difference. While I may never again be the grandfather who can attend family gatherings without causing a stir, I can be someone who helps others navigate similar challenges and who advocates for greater understanding and acceptance. Today, nearly 2 years after my cancer diagnosis, I'm living independently and building a life that incorporates both my medical realities and my need for connection and purpose. While my face will never look normal again, and while some people will always react with shock or discomfort, I've learned that it's possible to find acceptance and build meaningful relationships despite physical differences. My family relationships are still healing and may never return to exactly what they were before my cancer, but they're deeper and more honest than they were when they were based solely on easy comfort and superficial interactions. We've all learned about the difference between conditional and unconditional love, and we're working to build connections that can withstand the challenges that life inevitably brings. The experience has taught me that appearance, while important in our society, doesn't have to define our worth or determine our capacity for love and connection. It has also shown me that even the most devastating changes can lead to unexpected growth, new relationships, and different kinds of meaning and purpose. That's my story. How cancer made me look like a monster, and my family abandoned me because they couldn't bear to see my face, but how I found new communities and rebuilt relationships that were stronger than the superficial connections I had lost. Sometimes our worst tragedies can become sources of unexpected wisdom, strength, and deeper human connection.